Shadow Manor, the evil within. The night was shrouded in heavy mist as Evelyn's car slowed to a stop before the wrought iron gates of Shadow Manor. The towering estate loomed ahead, its broken windows and sagging roof silhouetted against the pale glow of the moon. As Evelyn stepped out of her car, a chill ran down her spine, though the night was unusually still. She was here out of necessity. Life had not been kind to Evelyn lately. Her debts were mounting, and her hope had dwindled to a flicker. This grand inheritance, Shadow Manor, was the only lifeline left. Yet standing before it, with its ominous aura and air of abandonment, she began to wonder whether she'd gained a fortune or a curse. Little did she know, the answer lay deep within the shadows of the house. As Evelyn pushed the heavy, groaning front doors open, the air inside hit her like a damp, icy breath. The vast entrance hall yawned before her, littered with decayed furniture, splintered wood, and crumbling plaster. Dust motes floated in the dim light of her flashlight, dancing like restless spirits. Evelyn's footsteps echoed eerily as she moved deeper into the house. There was a strange sound, so faint it might have been imagined. It was as though the house itself was whispering, its hoarse, wordless murmur riding on the drafts that wound through the halls. She paused before a family portrait, its surface tarnished by time. The figures stared back with eyes too lifelike, too piercing. She swore one of them, a shadowy figure standing slightly apart, hadn't been there a moment ago. She wasn't sure if she had blinked or imagined it. The next morning, Evelyn began her investigation of the sprawling, crumbling manor. Her curiosity outweighed her fear. The house, with all its decay, seemed to beg for its secrets to be uncovered. In the library, she found old letters stuffed in drawers and brittle journals tucked on sagging shelves. They were drenched in cryptic warnings and eerie mentions of a curse plaguing the family. One letter stood out, a desperate plea from her long-deceased great-aunt. It described the darkness that grips this house and the price one must pay to keep it from spreading. As she delved deeper, Evelyn found herself drawn toward the basement, the air growing heavier with every step she took. There, she discovered a locked chest adorned with ominous carvings. As she bent to examine it, a loud crash sounded upstairs. She froze. That night, the house came alive in ways Evelyn couldn't explain. Footsteps thudded down empty halls, windows frosted over despite the warm temperature, and her bedroom door creaked open on its own. She swore she heard whispers, faint and taunting, calling her name. Then she saw it. A figure cloaked in shadow standing at the end of the hallway. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It simply stood, watching her. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as her flashlight flickered. When the light sputtered back to life, the figure was gone. Her grip on reality began to falter. Was she losing her mind? Or was the darkness in this house as real as it felt? Either way, Evelyn knew she was no longer alone. In the days that followed, Evelyn was haunted not only by the presence in the house, but also by strange, vivid visions of the past. One night, she woke in a cold sweat, finding herself not in her bedroom, but in the grand dining hall of Shadow Manor, which now appeared pristine and fully restored. Candles burned brightly on the table as shadowy figures dressed in Victorian finery whispered to each other, glancing her way. The air crackled with a sinister energy. Among the guests was a man who carried an air of command, her great-great-grandfather. He raised a glass and spoke of power, wealth, and cementing a deal with the Shadow Realm. The guests cheered, their faces distorting into grotesque masks as the vision dissolved. Evelyn awoke on the floor of her own room, gasping for breath. Overwhelmed, Evelyn pieced together the fragments she had gathered from the journals, letters, and visions. Her ancestor had made a pact with an ancient, malevolent force, a deal that granted him great prosperity at the expense of his soul and those of his descendants. Each generation was doomed to face the entity, a shadowy presence bound to the very walls of the house. But what truly terrified her was her own role in the story. She was not simply an uninvolved witness. The entity had been waiting for her. Desperate for answers, Evelyn returned to the basement. She had discovered keys hidden throughout the house, behind loose bricks, inside hollowed-out books, which seemed meant for one purpose. Her heart pounded as she unlocked the chest. Inside was a map leading to a hidden room within the manor. Following the instructions, she stumbled upon a concealed door behind a tapestry. The room beyond was horrific. Symbols scrawled in blood stained the walls. Candles, long extinguished, had melted into waxen puddles. In the center of the room sat an altar, ancient, cracked, and reeking of decay. It pulsed with an unnatural energy. The figure materialized before her then, stepping out of the shadows as though it had been there all along. No longer vague and undefined, it loomed tall, its form shifting and writhing like smoke given shape. Its voice was low, guttural, reverberating within her very chest. "You cannot run," it said. "You are mine." The confrontation was utterly terrifying. Evelyn, clutching nothing but a flashlight and her wits, stood her ground. "Why? Why me?" she demanded, trembling but defiant. The entity laughed, a sound that chilled her to the core. "You are the key. End me, and the curse will be no more. Refuse, and I will thrive for eternity." The room grew darker, the air grew thinner. Evelyn had never felt more afraid or more determined. Evelyn realized what she had to do. The curse demanded a sacrifice. To destroy the entity and end the torment, she had to sever the bond between the house and her lineage. It wasn't just about bravery. It was about letting go of the fear and guilt that had controlled her life. With trembling hands, she used the symbols written on the altar to complete an ancient ritual described in one of the journals. The entity fought back, erupting in violent fury, but Evelyn pressed on. As the incantation ended, the shadowy figure let out an unearthly scream before dissolving into nothingness. The house groaned and quaked as though it were alive, finally defeated. When Evelyn emerged from the ruins of Shadow Manor, the first rays of dawn greeted her. The oppressive air was gone, replaced by a strange tranquility. But Evelyn herself was far from the same. The experience had changed her, broken her in some ways, but also rebuilt her into someone stronger. She dared one final glance back at the crumbling remains of the house. For the first time, it looked truly empty, the malevolent presence erased. And yet, as she walked away, she thought she heard faintly the sound of whispers drifting through the wind. The manor might have been defeated, but a seed of doubt remained. Was this truly the end, or only the beginning? The screen fades to black, leaving viewers with one haunting question. Would the shadows ever return?